Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I would like to begin by expressing my best wishes to you at the start of a new year that will certainly demand redoubled efforts to consolidate peace in Colombia. It is an honor to be joined by Foreign Minister Luis Gilberto Murillo. I am pleased also that Diego Tovar is able, once again, to address the Council in today's session, representing the other signatory party of the agreement. The presence of representatives of both the government and the former FARC-EP reflects their continued commitment to an implementation process that requires their active cooperation. I also look forward to hearing the perspective of Armando Balbuena from the Special High-Level Instance of Ethnic Groups, IAMPE, on the challenges of implementation of the ethnic chapter. Mr. President, as last year drew to a close, Colombians celebrated the 8th anniversary of the peace agreement, taking pride in historic achievements of the peace process, while looking ahead to fresh opportunities to further the cause of peace in 2025. Tragically, the first days of the year have been marred instead by violence. I am deeply saddened by the actions that have bloodied the remote Catatumbo region of northeast Colombia since late last week, claiming dozens of civilian lives, including former combatants, signatories of the peace agreement, as well as local leaders and members of communities. According to numerous reports, many of the victims were individually targeted and killed. The Secretary General issued a statement yesterday evening expressing his deep concern and condemnation of the violence against civilians in Catatumbo. President Petro has announced that he has suspended dialogues with the National Liberation Army, ELN, has traveled to the area of the violence and mobilized government agencies to help those affected. Thousands of persons have been displaced, and there has been an outpouring of appeals from civil society in the region and nationally for an immediate stop to the killing. The bloodshed, the result of an ELN attack in an area presence of a rival armed group known as EMBF, is part of the ongoing confrontation between armed groups and in various areas of the country where there is a limited presence of the state and where they compete for control over illegal economies. I condemn these killings, which are an attack against peace itself. And I call again for armed groups to cease all actions that place at risk the civilian population, including community leaders and peace signatories. I call further for armed groups to permit unhindered access for humanitarian responders. Local teams of the verification mission have assisted in the evacuation of at-risk persons, including ex-combatants from the areas of confrontation. And UN humanitarian colleagues are offering their supports to the affected population. I would like to acknowledge the dedication of our colleagues on the ground in this area, who from the very outset of the crisis have been doing their utmost to help those in danger and in need. Mr. President, Catatumbo is like many regions of Colombia that are still awaiting the dividends of the 2016 peace agreement in terms of a comprehensive presence of the state that would bring public services, legal economies, development opportunities, and security. It is in the vacuum of state presence that illegal armed groups are fighting for territorial and social control. Implementation of the peace agreement is central as ever to lasting solutions for preventing and resolving the causes of armed conflict. The Secretary General in his report acknowledges the strong commitment of the government to the implementation of the peace agreement. Translating the abundant desire for progress into increased results in the period ahead will depend not only on continued political will, but on establishing clear objectives and priorities, safeguarding resources, and overcoming obstacles to coordination. In this regard, I welcome the recent assurance by President Petro that budgets for the peace agreement will be protected despite the currently complex financial climate in the country. The success of the Ministry of the Interior's Rapid Response Plan aimed at accelerating implementation will depend directly upon the availability of resources to deliver. For example, on its promise to speed development and infrastructure projects to regions prioritized in the peace agreement under the newly established territorial pacts. Also in relation to rural reform, which has seen significant progress over the past year, funding will be essential for the adjudication and formalization of land. Mr. President, it is critical to accelerate implementation of the ethnic chapter of the peace agreement, which focuses on the needs and priorities of Colombia's Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities, including their protection. Too often, they are the most victimized by the violence still plaguing rural Colombia. The Bari and Yucpa are among the populations affected by the violence taking place in Catatumbo, for instance. We are hopeful also that the gender provisions of the peace agreement will move forward more rapidly in their implementation, in synergy with the new National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. This also requires adequate funding, a territorial approach, proactive leadership, and constant engagement with women's organizations. Reintegration continues to be an inspiring example of how peace is changing the lives of former combatants and communities. I was able to appreciate this 2 weeks ago when I visited the territorial area for training and reintegration of Tierra Grata in the department of Cesar. Former combatants demonstrated various achievements in the reintegration so far, such as the construction by their own means of over 70 permanent dwellings and the productive projects such as the shoemaking factory and a road paved together with a nearby community. In places where ex-combatants are living all around the country, significant challenges are yet to be addressed to ensure that the projects are sustainable, housing is improved, and security guaranteed. Señor Presidente.
Mr. President, with regard to the process of transitional justice, it must be recognized that progress has been achieved by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. This includes indictments, unprecedented indictments of 158 individuals considered to be those mainly responsible for serious crimes committed during the conflict, as well as their findings and their contributions to the truth. Nevertheless, it is still a source of concern that there are disagreements between the jurisdiction and those appearing before it with regard to the schedule and the scope of the proceedings. It is fundamental to continue with a constructive dialogue in order to achieve common visions and solutions that will make it possible to satisfy the rights of the victims and guarantee legal certainty for those participating in the process. The mission will continue to offer its good offices to the parties to this end. The just demands of the victims require a response which includes a broad panoply of instances, which includes but is not limited to the SJP. The SJP is called upon to play a special role as a transitional tribunal whose success will be determined by its capacity to contribute to both justice and to peace. If it manages to strike this delicate balance, the jurisdiction will consolidate its historic legacy, both for Colombia and for the world. This year, when we hope that finally the first sanctions issued by the jurisdiction will come about, there will need to be a decisive commitment and the active involvement of relevant entities of the state in order to establish the conditions for their implementation. Amongst the key actors are the Ministries for Defense and Justice, the Agency for Reincorporation and Unity for the implementation of the agreement. The allotment of the resources necessary will be an indispensable condition to achieve this goal. It is important to bring about effective coordination between the jurisdiction and the government. The demonstration by the state of its capacity for implementation, beginning with its own initial sanctions being issued, is fundamental for the success of the transitional justice process and for the agreement in general.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council. Over the past few years, Colombia has clearly demonstrated its commitment to dialogue as the most constructive way of addressing differences and resolving armed conflicts. The United Nations can only agree with that approach as a matter of principle. At the same time, the latest events in Catatumbo show us that any violence against civilians is unacceptable and can be devastating not only to the victims, but also to the very environment for peace talks. Violence erodes trust and legitimacy among the parties, communities, and public opinion at large that is essential for any peace process to succeed. With respect to the various dialogue processes underway in Colombia, moments of crisis are also moments of opportunity for reflection and adjustments where needed. For some time now, there have been calls from many sectors that, on the one hand, armed actors in dialogue should firmly commit to respect international humanitarian law, and on the other hand, the dialogue efforts should be accompanied by effective security strategies that focus on prevention and the protection of communities. I am sure that the government is constantly analyzing the situation and that it will seriously consider these calls while maintaining its willingness to pursue dialogue. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I would like to conclude by reiterating the centrality of the 2016 final peace agreement as the core instrument for consolidating peace across the country. Only by fully and deeply implementing the agreement, bringing a comprehensive presence of the state to the long marginalized areas, can the country expect to overcome the factors that continue to foster conflict. This year is an important window for Colombians to continue to work together to advance peace as a strategic national objective. It is also crucial and a crucial opportunity for the Council to maintain its unanimous support and solidarity for this historic peace process. I have no doubt that it will do so, and I greatly appreciate its support for the verification mission. I thank you, Mr. President.